Garlic, onions, mustard, rosemary, sex, salt, pepper, spindle, matches, ice. There is no poetry in a shopping list. You squiggled. You hoped the motion might make some sense of everything. Conrad entered, carrying a leather weekend bag. You frowned and waited. Neither of you said a word. You jumped as Arabella appeared, as though from nowhere, and clambered onto your knee. She opened the old fairy tale book. "Mummy, read." You hesitated. "Read, Mummy." The uninvited fairy gave her gift, that the princess would die by a spindle. You paused. You glanced at your shopping list. Conrad stood for a while. He seemed to be slightly swaying. "Mummy, read." But the seventh fairy had known what was coming. Although she was unable to reverse the eighth fairy's gift, she was able to alter it. The princess would not die, but fall into a deep sleep. How long, Mummy? 100 years. Knowing that the princess would be lonely, she also put the entire castle, the spits, the fire, the flies, everything within the castle's walls to sleep too. So she won't die, but sleep. That's right. Conrad crouched and bobbed on his toes. His knees cracked and creaked. His movements made you uncomfortable. "Mummy, read." 100 years passed. The castle was overgrown with brambles, weeds and trees, but everything was as it had been. Conrad stood up straight. "Only it isn't." You and Arabella looked up in unison. "Everything isn't, though. It just isn't." Conrad turned, walked down the hallway, scooped up his keys, walked to the door, put his head against it, spun on the spot, prowled a bit, walked back into the kitchen, stopped in the doorway. "My mind is infested by fish. I smell fish sauce. My stomach churns with it, with the thought, the smell, the taste. It's like I've got 1,000 eyes, and they are all knowing, all seeing, but not very kind at all." He nodded at his own words, swallowed as though he was gulping a large, bitter pill. Arabella looked at him. "I love you." "Okay." "Hebe?" "I don't know." "Conrad?" He nodded, but you couldn't think what to say. He spun on the spot again and marched down the hallway, flinging his bag over his shoulder. Suddenly you lifted Arabella off your knee and raced after him. You pulled him back by the arm, managed to get most of his body to face you, except his eyes, his nose, his lips. "Conrad, look at me." Every part of him was suddenly sacred, but also melting in your hands like ash. "Conrad, listen to me." He paused. You pawed over his face, let your hands study his brow, his cheeks, his cheekbones, his lines, his skin, his lips. "Conrad." His eyes drooped, and you saw the fish in his eyes that haunted him. "I'm so sorry." You cradled his temples as though he were a small boy. He gave you his weight, but soon the pendulum swung backwards, and he stood straight like a trunk once more, suddenly a single tree in the forest. He turned to leave. "Where are you going?" "I don't know." "When will you be back?" "I don't know." Arabella giggled as she flicked through the fairy tale book. He paused, and then he waited. For some time he stood without moving. You could hear his breath. You remembered the cove on the man-made beach just 40 minutes from London. Silhouettes passed, squid ink lunch and fine ale. Conrad sat opposite you on an old chocolate-coloured high bench. He looked at you there, and you saw him here. "I had a dream, Conrad. The night after our date at the beach with the squid ink and ale." He never flinched but listened. "Our baby burnt in a bonfire with nothing we could do. Rain, more like blood, put the fire out, but it was too late. It hissed and fizzed, and I reached out for the ashes. My hands did not burn. I held the ashes in my hand, and without knowing why I ate them." Conrad's knees seemed to give way, but he never fell. "I had the same dream 3 or 4 times, but it used to worry me because it would always be accompanied by a search. For you, I wouldn't know where you were. I would look everywhere for you, and finally I would find you under a tree reading. I'd walk to the tree, and the tree would dissolve into dust. I'd reach out for you, and you were gone. I would search again, walk along dirt roads, old ways, onto B roads. I would always hear the sound of leaves crunching underfoot, feel the delicate brush of minuscule raindrops, and taste dirt. I'd hear the sound of a blade against flesh." You paused. Conrad turned to look at you. He frowned in a way that suggested he was remembering something. "You always had a fawn in your hands, and all I could hear was rushing blood, a heartbeat beating, and vowels like sounds from another world." You paused. Arabella giggled. Conrad made a sound of an E, an A, an I, an O, but bit his tongue after that. You nodded. "I have to go. I'm going to go to Ireland. I'm going to think or work and think. I don't know, but I'll message you." You nodded. Arabella laughed. The door shut, and you stood in silence. Sounds from the street suddenly came into focus. A dog barked, a siren bleeped, and a young mother somewhere sung a lullaby.